So I think our game looks pretty cool, but I did get a request that I think makes a lot of sense, and that is how do we fix the UI that looks like very default? And what I mean by that is like when I run the game, you'll see we have this kind of decent looking, I think it's decent looking, like dialogue UI where we have the letterbox, black bars, and then like just kind of a pretty standard font. But it looks, it looks modern and it looks good. It looks cinematic. I'm okay with it. But once we get out of that, if you look at our quest entry over here, that's just like the default Unity dialogue or the default Unity UI, and it doesn't look very great. I think our talk bubbles look fine too. It's just this default looking Unity UI that's problematic. And then also, if I were to like hit my quest journal, this isn't so great looking either. So I'll show you a couple ways to deal with this, but at the end of the day, it's like, do you want to invest in learning how to make UI look good in Unity? Because this is all totally customizable. It's just, your mileage may vary depending on how much you know how to work the UI system in Unity. So first, before we get into that, there are some prefabs that you might want to try that look pretty good. So there's two elements we need to fix. If you look at the dialog manager, we can find them. So we see we have the dialog UI, and I use this letterbox template standard dialog UI. And remember, it's inside of the Pixel Crushers dialog system, prefabs, standard UI, prefabs, templates. So if we go in here, you can see there's like some options, right? Especially in this Pro folder. And so like if you used some of these, they look pretty cool. Right out of the box, you don't have to change anything. And some of them, like for instance, the nuke, and I think maybe the like wheel perhaps, have more than just the dialog UI. They actually have the quest tracker HUD and the quest log window that are kind of like customized and themed out to match the dialog UI. So that's pretty cool if you happen to be going with one of these that like I think wheel is kind of sci-fi looking and nuke is kind of like, I guess it's meant to be like post-apocalyptic themed. If you're not using one of those themes, you're kind of in the boat I mentioned earlier where you have to customize it yourself. So if you go to the dialog manager, and we've covered how to change the dialog UI, but if we keep digging around in here, we can find some of the other stuff. So in the instantiate prefabs component that's on my dialog manager game object, I see that there are some other prefabs here I can look at. So we have the basic standard UI selector elements. And actually, so what this is this is another one I would really want to change if I were gonna like make this a fancier looking project. So these are all UI elements. So when I double click that prefab, it takes me into a view with a like generated canvas to help me see these things, because they won't, if you were to like just drag this into your scene, it's not going to show up. You see this like giant red X's if you double click it. It's just, it has to be a child of a canvas. That's how UI works in Unity. But luckily these days, if you just double click it, it opens up in a special preview of that prefab with a built-in canvas thing here, so it'll actually render correctly, I think at least. But this is meant to be viewed in a 2D way, so it's going to make sense to click the 2D button here. And then now you can kind of see what this is going to look like. So I don't think I've ever seen this show up. I'm not sure how that works. But which one, let's see, go back to the dialog manager. We want to look this basic standard UI selector elements. Let's look at that one, and let's look at it in 2D. And so it's like all turned off by default, because it must be that the code that decides if the player's next to a usable, it will turn some of these on and fill in the blanks. So you might have to manually go in and start checking them. So we've seen this. And the thing that I really don't like is this reticle, because it just, in practice, it looks like this giant like circle thing. I actually feel like I never get this one, the X. I always just get this weird circle, and it probably just has to do with how I have it set up. But either way, it's like really big on the screen. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense in the way that we have our character set up. What you should note is when you make changes in these prefabs, you're going to get this little asterisk here, and I would probably not save the changes. So I would probably make sure you don't have autosave checked when you start messing with this stuff, because we don't really want to overwrite the built-in prefabs here. So I'm going to hit discard changes, and I'm actually just I'm gonna turn my starting sequence off and kind of show you what I'm talking about that thing I don't like. So if I like walk up to a character, see that like I'm okay with this, but this little thing, I feel like it could just be removed, which is really simple. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to open the standard UI selector elements. Is that what it was? I already forgot. Yeah, this was it. And I'm going to make a copy of it. So I'm going to hit File, Save As. And when I have a prefab open like this, which I guess it's kind of tricky to tell when you are in that scenario, but you'll notice you have like this all blue background, and you have this little back arrow at the top of the hierarchy that indicates you could go back to the scene instead of being in the current prefab editing mode. And I'm just going to make a copy, and I guess rather than save it in the dialog system folder, I'll save it in like my own prefabs folder, which presumably exists. Yeah. So I'll save this in here, and I'll leave it called copy, or you could call it custom or whatever you want, I guess. But the key thing is we want to be working in a copy so that we're not overwriting the default in case we ever want to review it or go back to it. And I think what I could probably just do is like, well, I could just delete stuff, but if there's code that references it, it might give me like a null reference exception. So rather, what I think I'll do is just uncheck these images. So the image component here is what, causes it to look like that. So I could replace it with a different one, but I just don't think I need that, because I think, in my opinion, I get enough feedback just by the part that appears in the top middle of the screen that tells me the name of the thing that I'm going to interact with. So that actually didn't work. And it's because even though I made that copy, I forgot to plug it in here. So on my dialog manager, now that I've got my copy, I am going to go into the standard UI selector elements thing here and instead plug in the new one that I just created. So I have to go click on it, and then in one click motion here, because if I click on this, it's going to change what's in the inspector. So I could either lock the inspector, or I could just in one single click and drag, click on this and drag it to where I need it to go without releasing, so that it doesn't get a chance to switch to the other thing I just clicked on. Sounds confusing, but by now you probably figured it out, and now that thing is gone. So that's cool. I like that. Now let's say I want to I think before I go any further, I should kind of just show you, like, if you want to use one of those other themes like I mentioned, you could just click this little button to pop this thing up. You can use this slider. Normally I leave it all the way to the left so that I can see the full names of files, but in this case I want to actually look at the pictures. Maybe we'll see if that's helpful or not. And I'm just going to type in quest tracker, And you can see there's 3 pictures. Actually, I'm not getting a preview, so that's too bad. But we have wheel and runic, and then this is the one we're already using. So like I could choose runic here, and we can just see what that looks like when I run the game. And if I was using the runic dialog UI, this maybe would like match it and be cool. But I'm not. And the other thing, like we can check out like what happens if we use the runic. So I'm going to search for a quest log window and see what options are there. Oh, there isn't a runic quest log actually, but let's check out what the wheel quest log looks like. So I'll run the game and I'm going to hit J. Oh, that's pretty cool. You see that nice animation too. There's 2 animations that are really neat. Watch it. It expands like from the center out, and then this text slides in from the left. It's pretty slick. It's like these little things that go a long way. This is cool. So if you're using any kind of sci-fi theme, I would say this is a good thing to check out. However, I'm not. So instead, what I'm going to do is just kind of continue on going through how you could customize some of this stuff. So what we'll look at is going to apply to like anything that you might choose here. But I'm going to start with this standard selector elements thing because we kind of already we made a copy already and it's simple. So we'll use this as our example, at least initially. So I'm going to click this once to figure out where it lives in my project and then double click it to open. And it's all hidden, remember, so I guess I have to turn this thing on, and now I can kind of see what it looks like. So what you could do, you can see all the pieces in the hierarchy, and if you're ever not sure what any piece is, my advice, just see what happens if you turn it off. So toggling it on and off will kind of help you understand what's what. But in many cases, the selection here will help also. And generally, when you're using UI, you want to be using this rectangle tool. And, you know, I think this is going to be set up to scale based on how big the content is. So you want to be pretty careful about messing with like the anchor stuff over here. But what you could do pretty easy, I think, is like you could change the font or the colors, or if you look at this thing, so let's see, what is this one? Oh, this goes around the whole shebang, but I don't really normally see that, at least I don't think so. Yeah, see, this image is unchecked, so it's not being used. But this one, I see this gray thing, and if I find the image component on there and try turning it on and off, I can see, okay, that's what's controlling the gray thing. So if I wanted it to be a different color, like say black, and you see that kind of just made it like a darker gray because there's some alpha being used, so you could make it totally opaque or totally transparent. Maybe it does make sense to be like a little transparent, I think. And if you wanted, you could also, so that's one, if you just wanted to change the color, that's pretty easy. Or I could check out these alternative image options. So you see it by default, all the Unity UI uses this thing called background for the image here. But if I click the little target thing, and this is where I'm going to get a lot of mileage out of this slider, so I'm going to make it as big as it goes, and I can check out some of these other images and see if they work. Like many of these little buttons might work if they're sliced correctly, which I can't tell. The easiest thing to do would just be to try it. Like this could be kind of cool. Or even something like this. See, I can see this is sliced correctly, and that just means it will scale with, like, if we didn't have these corners as separate images, when you scaled it, the corners would become like stretched out looking or skewed. And so this 9 slice technique here helps us scale only the middle part and the sides without scaling the corners, and it's just circumvents that issue. So let's just try this thing and see what it does, and let's put the color to white. When you're using a graphic where you want to see the art, you always want to make the color white, and we'll make it fully opaque. And so if I save this, we would have something that looks more like this, but actually what I want to do also here, you can see it's kind of cutting off my use message. So I could, this is controlled by like a layout group, so that's why it's not stretching when I tried to move it down. So we could try something, we could try messing with this stuff, which that gives me a little more room, but then I need to change the use message to move that up a little. So is this one controlled by a layout component? It may be. So if I want to offset it, yeah, let's see, how am I going to offset this? This is where you're just going to have to watch some tutorials about Unity UI to figure out how this stuff works. I don't know, maybe there's tooltips on some of these. I don't know. I'm going to ignore it for just this minute and see what it looks like when I run the game before I get too bent out of shape. But what I do want to do is change the font color. So on my use message text, I'm going to adjust the color. And maybe, actually, I mean, honestly, white probably looks good in this case, but you could change it if you wanted. So let's save. And let's just kind of see what that looks like. I have to go back out of my prefab editor and we'll run the game. So it looks like something colors this yellow. I wonder if that happens in the dialog manager, or there's some setting, some variable about what color things are, because in my prefab it was white. I do see this issue where it's a little too low, so I want to figure out how to adjust that spacing. And then this just doesn't match at all. I'd want to reskin this or use something different. Likewise with the quest manager or the quest log, we can go back to our dialog manager. We can find the quest log prefab that's being used here and change it back to the dialog, the standard dialog system one, which I guess lives in here. Gotta keep clicking back on it. I'm gonna have to do it again. Maybe I should just lock this guy. Basic, I think, is what we were on. And we're gonna drag that one in there. And I can unlock this now, and what I'm gonna do, actually what I should have done instead of that, is just double click on this guy, go to 2D mode, let's go to File, Save As to make a copy of this. Let's put it in our Assets Prefabs folder here. I'll just leave the same name except with copy at the end. And you know, now you can kind of safely go to town changing all this. So things like you might, I think you can get a lot of mileage just out of changing the colors. You could change the image of some of these backgrounds. So like, just figure out which, so here's the main panel. Let's see what it is. It's like everything, right? Here's this image. So I could change that color, which is easy, or I could look for an image and see how that works. Here's that one, here's like this one. Anything with these little dashed slices will work pretty well for adjusting. I don't know, let's see how maybe this looks. Actually, this is kind of cool. This is meant to have a portrait there, so that's not what I want, but maybe something like this, I don't know. could work. These are all kind of a little sci-fi for my particular project's theme, so you might want to make something yourself or just use solid colors. I think you could get a lot of mileage out of that. Same thing, like even this little checkbox, you can go in and change like the source image for it, or just change the color. Like if I for some reason wanted it to be red or pink. So you can change all this stuff. And again, if you're feeling like it's like you're running into a brick wall, I think you just need to go do some searching for a tutorial about Unity UI, which is its own skill to learn. So you'll be able to do a little bit quick and dirty, but if you really want to have something very specific, you're going to have to do the work to learn it, learn how the UI system is meant to be used. All right, I just wanted to have a quick addendum here, because I left a couple things unanswered. But if you remember, my use message was getting cut off. I expanded padding on the selection text panel here. So we established that like spacing would do that, but it was still kind of getting cut off. Padding, and then I adjusted the bottom padding to make it large enough to not cut off my use message. And the other thing that was happening was we were getting yellow text, even though this was white, and that was confusing. But if you look at the top level element here, there's a script called Standard UI Selector Elements, and you can see there's this in range color, which ours only shows up when things are in range, which is part of why it doesn't make sense for us to use that thing that I hid. So we could change the color here. Like, I think I just want it to be yellow, or I'm sorry, I just want it to be white. And so if I save this now and go back to my game, it should actually look a little bit better. Of course, it doesn't match my theme at all, so but at least you can see how these changes can be made. Cool. All right.